you very much, and I appreciate, I was scheduled to come in at 2 o'clock, and I appreciate the leader accommodating me 5 minutes early. Mr. President, there is talk about an imminent compromise among the Gang of Eight and perhaps a couple of others that would move this bill along. I think I've made it clear that the bill as currently written is flawed and would not be something that would get my vote. So anything that would move us toward a better solution, toward better enforcement of the border, such as 20,000 additional security agents on the border, would be a positive step. I do want to make it clear, however, that the bill as written would not stem the tide of illegal immigration. The bill as written would not provide a solution to our broken immigration system. And without further amendment, my understanding of the new compromise that is about to come forward also would be deficient. I appreciate people working toward a consensus. And I look forward to reading the amendment as it is presented, if it is indeed presented later this afternoon or later this weekend. But there are still changes that need to be made and ways that we can improve the bill. I would point out to my colleagues that a Congressional Budget Office report released day before yesterday indicates that border security components of the immigration bill as written will not stem the tide of illegal immigration in a meaningful way, because large numbers of people are projected still to overstay their visas should the legislation pass in that form. Even the Congressional Budget Office, a bipartisan, independent, call it by the numbers office, predicts that the reforms agreed to by the so-called Gang of Eight would reduce illegal immigration by only 25%, far short of what the bill's supporters have contended. Dependable border security and interior security are crucial to the success of the entire immigration system. This means putting in place the proper infrastructure and technology, including a national e-verify system for employers. And I congratulate and commend and encourage the junior senator from Ohio, Senator Portman, for his efforts to move toward a consensus in that very important area of the bill too. These steps, securing the border and strengthening e-verify, should precede efforts to grant legal status, and I think most Americans agree with that. Now, I've offered a number of amendments. I want to take these few moments to make my suggestions about how to improve this bill. But first and foremost, I want to urge my colleagues, urge the leadership of the committee on both sides of the aisle and the leadership of this Senate to give this Senate an opportunity to speak on the issue of sanctuary cities. Now, most people are aware that one of the great ways to flout the law, as it has been for a local jurisdiction to say to people who have overstayed their visas, to people who've come here illegally or stayed here illegally, come to our city and we'll provide you sanctuary. Come to our city and we will ignore the law of the land and make sure we do our part that it's not enforced against you. So-called sanctuary cities. And as a member of the other body, Madam President, I voted for legislation and amendments to crack down on this. If this bill works as it should work, then there should be no illegals in the country seeking sanctuary in a sanctuary city. So my legislation to prohibit the practice of sanctuary cities really, in my view, should be accepted by consensus. If the authors of this bill really believe it is a solution to our broken immigration system, then there should be no need for a city to say we're going to take in people who are not here legally, because by definition under this bill, we will have said the system is fixed. So under my amendment, Madam President, these jurisdictions would be denied state criminal alien assistance program funds if they insist on continuing to be sanctuary cities. We would deny, under my amendment, law enforcement grants from the Departments of Homeland Security and Justice for the continuation of so-called sanctuary cities. My amendment would also encourage information sharing by law enforcement officials and stipulate that individuals who violate the immigration law should be included in the National Crime Information Center database. Why would that be the least bit controversial? And it would also ensure that states have access to federal technology that is helpful in identifying immigrants who are not here by permission and who are deportable. I would say to my colleagues, Madam President, any bill that comes out of the House of Representatives will almost surely have a sanctuary cities provision. We need a vote on this Senate floor so that the public, so that our constituents back home in our individual states can know where we stand on this issue. And I would again emphasize, if we believe the law will work, if we believe this new plan will fix a broken system, then there should be no need for any jurisdiction to call itself a sanctuary city. Now, secondly, I have an amendment, a separate amendment that would double penalty fees. It would double from $1,000 to $2,000 the fee that illegal immigrants must pay at various steps of the process. We all know that $1,000 amounts to far less than what is often paid to so-called coyotes who smuggle people from across the border. Penalties are supposed to hold people accountable for breaking the law and not serve as merely an inconvenience. So I have a second amendment that would increase the penalty in the legislation from $1,000 to $2,000. And then I have a third amendment, Madam President, that would require the Secretary to adjust these statutory fees and penalties for inflation, index them for inflation. What could be simpler for that? A $1,000 penalty in 2013 might not amount to the same degree of penalty in 2015 or 2019. And we index many of our amounts and figures under statute according to inflation. And so my third amendment would simply allow for annual inflation adjustment. Fourthly, I have an amendment that would strike the ability of illegal immigrants to apply for provisional legal status if they have previously filed a frivolous application for asylum, one that has been determined by the authorities to be frivolous. By law, those who knowingly file a frivolous application, for example, containing statements that are deliberately fabricated or responses that are deliberately fabricated, should be permanently barred from receiving any benefit under the new act. Another amendment I have would expedite removal proceedings of illegal immigrants with serious criminal offenses. What could be simpler and more straightforward than that, Madam President? It would require the Secretary of Homeland Security to initiate expedited removal proceedings against those who are deemed ineligible for provisional legal status, for example, because they belong to a gang, or they have committed an aggravated felony, or committed an offense against a child, or a domestic violence offense. It would seem to me that this sort of amendment should be the sort of amendment that the senator from Louisiana, Senator Landrieu, was speaking about only a few moments ago, that should be accepted by consensus through a voice vote. And finally, I have an amendment to ensure that those found ineligible have their provisional legal status revoked. If an application is submitted and the duly constituted authorities under this new act determine that the individual is not entitled to the relief requested, then provisional legal status should be revoked. And for example, this would be if he or she is found to be ineligible, if he or she used fraudulent documentation or did not fulfill the continuous physical presence requirement of the bill, then that status is denied and the individual should then have conditional status revoked. I conclude by saying, Madam President, that I appreciate the good faith effort that has been made by the leadership on both sides of the aisle, by the leadership of the committee, and by people acting ad hoc as a self-appointed group of 8 or group of 10. But we need to make it clear that any agreement announced with great fanfare this afternoon or perhaps this weekend is not the end of it. We have a lot of time left for excellent ideas to improve this bill, to bring it around to the point where people like me can vote for it, where people like my constituents back home can feel that it is in fact a solution to a broken system, and we can forward this legislation on to a House of Representatives with a national consensus behind it. No great changes have been made in the Congress to broad policy disagreements without bipartisan consensus. And I would hope that amendments like the 6 that I've just described, particularly my amendment with regard to sanctuary cities, would be adopted so that we can move toward a consensus that we do not have at this point. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor.